For the biggest troublemaker in the alphabet, I like to try to get it as mechanical as I can. In other words, starting out with the letter width based on the other letters that you're creating, you start out just slightly inside, because if you go all the way to the outer edge, it looks out of balance and it almost looks top heavy, like it's going to fall forward. So just kick it back, that first beak or serif. And then to draw the S shape, you obviously are going to take into consideration your thick and thin lines. So when you get to that middle part, you're going to be thinking in your mind that's your thick point. So I need to establish the curvature based on that thick point. And obviously you just come at the end, the bottom serif, where the letter width stops on the left side. And same with the lowercase, it's just the same method. Establish your width and then start just slightly inside of that right side for your upper part of your S. It looks much better optically. It doesn't look so much like it's leaning forward. And so being mindful of that middle portion is your thickest stroke. So obviously the upper portion of the S is always smaller than the lower portion because that's more optically pleasing. And so that's how you're going to establish it. I always stay with one line, that's the inside line or right side of the S. And then you just go ahead and you draw that line every time, every S. Executing it this way will help you make it more automatic every time you go to make an S, and it'll also keep them more consistent. So in case you do S's in a row, you have more consistency. So I just start out with the serif or beak and just go ahead and establish those 2 points because that's our A to B point. Now it's just a matter of following that sketch line that you created with a single thin stroke, just like you were going to draw with a pencil. And doing this repetitively, about 1,000 of these S's, you will get to the point where you won't even need a sketch line because it will be a muscle memory. This would be the time of any tweaking, anything that's a little off. You can't do much tweaking at the thin stroke points, but at the thick stroke points or where it starts to taper, you can kind of tweak it a little bit so that it has the right S shape that you're looking for. At this point, you're pretty much home free. Now it's just a matter of a horizontal flat brush creating your thick stroke, starting at the top and just bringing it right around. There's no spinning here right now because the whole idea is to create that thick stroke at the midsection, but it needs to be real graceful, smooth taper stroke. And you're thinking in your mind to match the thick strokes of your other letters. And then for the serifs, to fill in the rounds, and this is also a time to tweak and be sure you've got a nice flowing consistency around the S shape. And then you can go ahead and flatten out your brush and fill in the rounds on those serif beaks. Flat horizontal brush starting, blending right from the thin stroke, and then at this point I'm spinning just slightly counterclockwise to round that off, and then flatten it out at the top. It makes it a nice clean top edge. Now for the lower serif beak, this is a flat brush on vertical, and you're going to come down and spin clockwise and spin it and taper it right into that thin stroke and fill it in. Flatten out the bottom, and you're home free. The lowercase is executed in the same way, same system, except for there's difference in the serifs. They're little rounds rather than these beaks. And it's just drawing that first S shape, and if you need to, this is the time to tweak it. Just go easy on the thin stroke points, because those you want to make sure that they're nice and thin. With a slightly flat brush, you go ahead and execute your thick stroke. matching the thick strokes of your other lowercase letters. And with a slightly flattened brush to execute those little rounds, starting with the cutting in through the thin stroke, you just go ahead and pull and then drop down gracefully and then back up. And that'll create your upper round serif. For this one, you're going to come down with a flat brush and draw an ellipse and then back in to your thin stroke. Capital T starts with obviously our guidelines, our letter width, which is those two serifs that you see, and then you go ahead and center your stem thick stroke based on those two serifs. That establishes your width and also your center. Overlap your 50% with a flat brush, following your italic axis. And then you're going to go ahead and you don't have to go all the way to the bottom because you're going to create a serif there. So it cuts the letter time down a lot. And then go ahead and strike your two serifs with a vertical flat brush, and keeping in length of the consistency of your other capital letters. For the upper bar of the T, this is actually a do as I say, not as I do moment. You need to have that brush flattened out to get a nice, consistent, thin stroke. For some reason, I had a contracted brush, and it is much better if you have a flattened brush for these serifs and thin strokes. So go ahead and flatten your brush out and make that top bar. It'll be much more consistent and cleaner and thin stroke. And then go ahead and flatten it out to round off these serifs, drawing a radius from the thin stroke on top and meeting the point at the serif. Clean up your edge. Again, flatten it out for the other side. Starting at the thin stroke, pulling in towards the serif, so it's a nice clean transition, and then go ahead and spin counterclockwise to make that side of the round. Same with the bottom. Flatten out the brush. Transition into a slight round on both sides. Lowercase t begins with just above the lowercase top guideline with a flat brush, tapering clockwise to a nice point, and another stroke, same, starting above the line, just a little further up. You want to start with a little angle because you're going to angle that top portion of the T. Come down, overlap, begin to turn clockwise, meeting that tapered point. And with a flattened brush, I would flatten that brush should have been flattened to make this flick. This is where you get to practice your flick. And the reason why I didn't execute that flick and had to come back and touch it up is because I didn't go back and flatten my brush. So make sure you flatten your brush to create that flick. And then create your terminal, consistent angle with the others, with a slight arc, and touch up. Go ahead and make your crossbar. Just don't make this too long. It looks much more elegant if these are shorter than longer. The key to the success of the capital U is that lower round. You want that to be consistent on both sides, and that's complicated by the fact that it's an italic letter. But the idea is to go ahead and make your thick stroke and taper in, a nice thin taper at the bottom. Flatten out your brush to make the other side of the thick stroke. Don't worry about the top, you're going to serif that. Overlap 50%, coming down and spinning your brush clockwise slightly to get that thin taper. Now here's where you want to make that other side the same round to match it. With a vertical flattened out brush, start at the top just below the guideline, bringing it down the axis line, and here's where you want to taper in right into that stroke. And this is where starting on the left side for right-handed people is the best pinstriper technique. For the serifs, you want to go ahead and flatten your brush. Left side. And then you want to make the right side the same length. So make these two serifs the same length. To fill in those rounds, you want to go ahead and flatten your brush out. You're going to start in the serif, and you're going to do a radical counterclockwise turn. Super sharp, because you want to flow right into that thin. That's going to be the secret of that one. For the right side of that, you're just going to follow down, spinning counterclockwise to follow down like you're going to make a stripe, an arced stripe down into the thin stroke. For the thick stroke serif, it's a lot easier. You don't have to spin it all. You just start inside the serif and round it. Keep it flat and horizontal, round it, flat and horizontal. The lowercase u begins with that small stroke just above the top line, a flattened brush, arced, thin stroke, 45 degrees. Flatten out again and make that curved, thin stroke to be your first stroke right below the top point, just right at the top baseline. Go to the left and then curve back in towards the right. This time you're going to make a slight little loop at the bottom, not a taper, because this you want this to have a little round to it. Not a huge round, but just a slight round. Tuck your flat brush at a 45 degrees into your top point, flare it out, pushing down the brush, pull up, spin slightly clockwise, and taper off. Establish your letter width with the thick stroke on the left, keeping it clean at that top line, so that'll be squared off. Bringing it down, spinning clockwise to a taper. Repeat that stroke, overlapping 50%. Flat brush, horizontal, squared off at the line, pulling down, spin clockwise, taper into the point. This is where you want to start in that inside corner, and your goal and target is to bring a semi-curved line down to meet that bottom loop for a nice transition. Finish off with your terminal. And I'm actually going to do this letter over again because I was unhappy with two things. The letter width overall, and also the taper of the thin line. It breaks up my concentration a little bit when I stop and take photographs of each stroke that I do. So that I wanted to just go ahead and execute the letter without stopping. And this loop you don't want to make too big. You just want it to be just enough of a loop so it doesn't look like a letter like V or something. It's not. You just don't want it to be a sharp point, but you don't want it to be a big loop either. And starting, and then again, tucking in that 45-degree tapered stroke, bring it around with a nice small loop. Flatten out your brush. And I'm also narrowing this letter slightly. I didn't like the width of that first U. So bringing down, spinning clockwise, tapering. Thicken the stroke, overlapping, tight on the line, spin clockwise, taper into the point. I'm going to terminal off this, well, since I'm there, with the brush retracted. Flatten out the brush, start on that inside top corner, and a little more breathing room too inside that intersection looks nice too. Bringing it down, tapering in right into that loop.